It was late Sunday when I found the photograph again. The edges had curled from heat and years in a shoebox, and the gloss had gone matte, like it was tired of being looked at. I remember the faint hum of the refrigerator behind me, the smell of burnt coffee from a pot I'd left too long on the burner. My mom was asleep upstairs. I was 42 and still keeping boxes from my parents' attic stacked in my garage like half-finished thoughts. In the photo, we were standing in front of the lake house. Dad had his hand on my shoulder, Mom was squinting into the sun, and between them stood a man in a brown jacket, smiling the kind of smile you only fake for one shutter click. The caption on the back, in Mom's neat handwriting, read, "Family, 1993, Jim and us." Only problem was, I never had an Uncle Jim. Dad left that night in August 93. I was 10. I remember the slam of the screen door and the sound of the car starting. I remember Mom sitting on the porch until the mosquitoes found her. But what I didn't remember, until that photo resurfaced, was the man who'd been there earlier that day. I tried to tell myself maybe I'd just forgotten. Kids misfile memories all the time. But something about that face wouldn't let go. The angle of his jaw, the small scar above the lip, like a half-healed split. I'd seen it somewhere else. That week I took the box inside, spread the photos on the kitchen table, and started sorting. Most were normal. Birthdays, school plays, a few awkward Christmases. Then more of him appeared. Same brown jacket, same quiet half-smile. Sometimes he stood a little too close to Mom, or his hand rested on the porch railing right next to hers. Dad was rarely in those shots. When he was, he looked tense. I called Mom the next morning. She still lives in the same house, though the porch is new, and the lake has receded. She answered with the tired softness she always has. "Hey, Mom, do you remember someone named Jim from the lake house around 93? There was a long silence, only her breathing and a dog barking in the background. "Jim who?" she said finally. "The guy in the pictures. You wrote his name on the back." "I don't remember," she said quickly. "Maybe a neighbor." She changed the subject to her knees and the weather. I let it go for the moment, but the air between us stayed charged. That night, I scanned the photo and ran a reverse image search. Nothing. Then I tried a hunch. Old newspaper archives from our county, early 90s. When you grow up in a small town, the local paper is half obituaries, half gossip disguised as community notes. 3 hours in, I found a story. Local contractor dies in late-night collision, August 16th, 1993. The photo was grainy, but clear enough. Same man, brown jacket, same scar. The caption read, "James G. Heller, 38, of Clearwater." The date of death was the same night my father left. I didn't sleep. The coffee tasted like metal the next morning. I kept replaying that night in my head, the car pulling out, Mom's face at the door. If Heller died that night and Dad left that same evening, they had to be connected somehow. I started digging deeper. Clearwater wasn't far, a small drive east near the state line. I called their records department pretending to be doing genealogical research. The clerk, a man named Stanley who sounded like he'd been smoking since the Ford administration, said, "Accident records that old are on microfilm. You'd have to come in." So I did. The library smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. I signed in, found the right reel, and began scrolling through the black and white negatives until the headline reappeared. "Fatal crash on County Road 6. According to the report, Heller's truck had veered off the road and hit a tree around 10 p.m. Police suspected he'd been drinking after leaving Lakeshore Cabins. My stomach turned. Lakeshore Cabins was the resort we stayed at that summer. The same week Dad left. The article mentioned witnesses who heard shouting near one of the cabins earlier that evening. No names given. I copied the page, folded it into my jacket, and drove back home in silence. The highway looked smaller than it used to. Every curve felt familiar and wrong at the same time. Mom didn't pick up my next two calls. On the third, she finally answered, annoyed. "Why are you asking about this?" "I found a newspaper article, Mom, about Jim Heller. He died that same night. You were there." "I told you I don't remember," she said, voice rising. "Then why was he in our family photos? Why did Dad leave that night?" There was the faint clatter of dishes, and then she said something so low I almost missed it. "Because your father couldn't look at him anymore." Then she hung up. For 2 days, I avoided work and barely ate. I kept replaying her words. Couldn't look at him anymore. It implied knowing, maybe betrayal. I went back through the boxes, hoping for something else. A letter, a receipt, anything. Eventually, I found an envelope tucked inside a photo album. The handwriting was Dad's. Sharp, deliberate. Inside was a single page. "If he comes around again, tell him I know. Tell him to stay away from the boy." No signature, just that. The boy. That was me. I drove to Mom's place unannounced. She opened the door wearing an old cardigan, her expression already tight. "Mom, we need to talk." "I don't want to, Ben." I held out the letter. "Then at least explain this." She took one look, then went pale. "Where did you get that?" "In one of Dad's boxes." She sank into the couch, hand trembling. For a long time she didn't speak. Finally she said, "Your father wasn't supposed to see him that night. He came to say goodbye." "Goodbye to who?" "To me," she said, "and to you." I felt something crack open in my chest. "Why would—" She cut me off. "Because he thought he was your real father." The room went still. I couldn't move. Couldn't think. It took her an hour to explain, in broken pieces. She'd met James Heller 2 years before I was born. He worked maintenance at the lake resort, came around to fix things at our cabin one summer. My dad was away on business a lot. She said it wasn't supposed to happen more than once, but she found out later she was pregnant. "He knew?" I asked. "Your dad?" She nodded. "He suspected. When you were born, he said you didn't have his eyes. I told him he was imagining things, but he saw Jim again when we went back to the lake. He confronted me. He wanted to leave that night, but I begged him to stay for you. He drove off to cool down." "And Jim?" She swallowed. "He followed him. He was drunk. He wanted to explain, but he never made it out of the county." I sat there in the quiet, my mind barely keeping up. So Dad had left because of that. Because of me. When I got home, I poured a drink I didn't want and stared at the photo again. Heller's smile looked different now. Sad. Almost apologetic. Dad's hand on my shoulder felt heavier than ever. I thought about the chain of events that led there. One mistake, one confrontation, one crash. And then decades of silence. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I went online and searched for James G. Heller Clearwater relatives. It took hours, but eventually I found an obituary for a woman named Linda Heller Bryson, his sister. The guest book still accepted messages. I typed, "I think we might be related. My name is Benjamin Ward. Please contact me if you can." I didn't expect a reply. 2 days later, she emailed back, "Benjamin, I've been waiting for someone to reach out. There's something you should know about that night." He wasn't alone in the truck. My hands went cold reading that. She attached a scanned police note, one I hadn't seen in the microfilm. It listed unidentified passenger, male, presumed dead, body unrecovered after fire. Dad's car was never found. I printed the email and stared at it until dawn. The lines blurred, words doubling. Could my father have been in that truck? Could he have died, and Mom never knew? Or had he somehow survived and disappeared? I needed to see where it happened. The next morning, I drove back to Clearwater. The road where the crash happened was half overgrown now, flanked by pine trees and faded memorial crosses. The tree from the photo still stood, bark split from old impact scars. Someone had carved initials into it. JH plus. The second set was unreadable. I knelt, tracing the grooves, and felt something shift under the leaves. A small, rusted keyring. I pocketed it without thinking. On the way back to the motel, I kept staring at it. There was one tag still legible. Ward, my last name. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this story wasn't finished. Because if Dad was in that truck, then the man who raised me might not have died at all. The motel light flickered above the sink, casting a dull orange hue across the room. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding that rusted keyring between my fingers. It didn't look like much. 2 corroded keys, one larger than the other, and a flattened tag stamped with my last name, Ward. I turned it over again and again, trying to picture my father's hands on it. If it was his, how did it end up at the crash site? Sleep didn't come that night. I left the television on low, an old true crime rerun murmuring in the background. Around 3 a.m., a thought struck me. The tag looked like one you'd see from mailboxes or storage lockers, not a house key. I grabbed my laptop and searched Clearwater storage facilities established before 1993. Only one hit: Lakeside Storage and Boatyard. The next morning, I drove there. The place looked half abandoned. The fence sagged in spots, and a faded sign read, "Cash only." Closed Tuesdays. A man in a trucker cap stepped out of the small office as I parked. "Help you?" he asked, eyeing me like I might be a repo man. I held up the key. "Do you still have units with this kind of tag?" He squinted. "That's one of ours. Yeah. Old numbering system. We switched to plastic cards after the flood back in '94. Could we check if it still fits one?" He shrugged. "Depends if it's still rented. What's the name?" "Ward." He turned to an old ledger on the counter, flipping pages so slowly I started counting the seconds. Finally, he looked up. "Huh. Says Unit 112. Rented till '95. No renewal. But it never got cleared out. Owner stopped paying, but when we opened it, management note says, contents held by request of local authorities." "Authorities?" He nodded. "Sheriff's office. Said it was part of an investigation. We left it alone." I leaned on the counter. "Do you mind if I take a look?" He eyed me. "You a cop?" "No, just family." Something in my voice must have convinced him. He grabbed a ring of master keys and led me down a narrow aisle of corrugated doors. The air smelled like rust and rain. He stopped at a dented door marked 112 and slid the padlock open. "Knock yourself out," he said. When he left, I hesitated before pulling the door up. The smell hit first. Dust, mildew, something faintly metallic. Inside were 3 boxes stacked neatly, a folded tarp, and an old red gas can. Everything looked untouched for decades. On top of the first box sat an envelope. My name was written across it. For a long minute, I just stared. Then I opened it. Inside were photographs, different from the ones I'd found before. Some were copies of my school pictures. Others were Polaroids of me playing in the yard, Mom hanging laundry, the dog sleeping by the porch, all taken from a distance. Whoever took them was outside the house. Behind them was a note, folded once. Ben. I never meant for you to find me like this. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't fix what happened that night. There are things your mother will never tell you, because she can't. But the truth is in the cabin at Lake Shore. The one we stayed in before everything fell apart. Look in the floorboards. No signature, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Dad's. I sat there in the dark storage unit, the air heavy with dust. He'd been alive long enough to leave this note, long enough to rent a storage locker. But what had he meant? The truth is in the cabin. The resort had closed years ago after a fire. I remembered hearing about it on local news sometime in the 2000s, but the property still existed. People still fished there. I could find it. By the time I got back to my car, the decision was already made. It was a 2-hour drive to Lake Shore. The main gate was padlocked, the old sign half hidden by vines. I parked on the shoulder and climbed over the fence. The cabin stood in various states of decay, collapsed roofs, peeling paint, shattered windows, but I found ours easily. It was the only one still partly standing near the waterline. The front door was swollen shut. I shoved it open, coughing as dust exploded in the sunlight. The inside smelled like charred wood and lake mold. I remembered flashes of that summer. Dad sitting at the table, Mom humming off key while cooking, the sound of cicadas outside, and faintly, a knock on the door that night before everything fell apart. I found the spot described in the note, the corner of the living room where our rug used to be. I knelt and pressed on the warped floorboards. One gave way under my weight. Beneath it was a small metal box. My hands shook as I lifted it out. It wasn't locked. Inside were documents, a cassette tape, and a folded letter. The documents were car repair receipts and motel invoices, dates matching the weeks after the accident. The motel names weren't local. One was in Tennessee, another in Arkansas. He'd been traveling. The letter was addressed to L. Ward, my mother. Linda, I saw the wreck. He wasn't alone. I pulled him out before the fire spread, but I couldn't help the other man. I know you'll hear the opposite, but I didn't kill him. I couldn't. He came at me first. I had to run before they blamed me. I'll try to call when it's safe. My pulse quickened. If he'd been at the crash, then he'd survived, but he thought they would blame him. The other man had been Jim Heller. The cassette tape had no label. I found a small tape player in my trunk, one of those old habits from keeping junk I never throw out. I popped the tape in, pressed play, and held my breath. At first, static, then a voice, low, tired, familiar. Ben, if you ever hear this, it means I didn't make it back. I didn't run because I was guilty. I ran because no one would believe me. Jim found out the truth about you before I did. He wanted to take you from me. He said he had proof, and he wouldn't stop. I confronted him by the cabins, and he came at me. The truck went off the road before I could stop it. I swear to you, I tried to save him. I thought I did, but when I saw the flames, I couldn't stay. Your mother wouldn't survive the scandal. Neither would you. I just wanted to protect you. I stopped the tape, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped the player. It took me an hour to drive back to the motel. I didn't turn on the radio. The world outside felt too quiet, like it was waiting for me to decide what to believe. That night I called Mom again. She didn't answer. I left a message telling her I knew everything, or at least enough. The next morning, I packed up the tape and letter and drove to her house. She was sitting on the porch when I arrived, as if she'd known I was coming. Her dog barked once and went quiet. "Where did you go?" she asked, voice flat. "Lake Shore," I said. "Found his note, the locker, the tape." She closed her eyes. "Oh, Ben." I sat across from her. "He didn't die that night, did he?" "No," she whispered. "Not then." She told me he'd called her twice, months after the crash. Once from a payphone in Mississippi, then again a few weeks later. He said he'd found work, maybe a way to clear his name, but he never gave details. Then one day, a letter arrived. No return address. Just the words, "Don't look for me. It's safer that way." She'd kept it, of course. I could see it in her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She looked at me, tears catching the light. "Because you were 10, Ben. You were grieving him, and I didn't want to take that away from you again. He made me promise to let you have a normal life." "And Jim? You loved him?" Her jaw tightened. "Not the way you think. He was an escape, a mistake. But your father loved you enough to stay for a while. That's what matters." I wanted to yell, but I didn't. I just sat there and let the silence drag between us. Finally, I said, "There's more. The tape? He said Jim knew something. Proof. Do you know what he meant?" Her eyes flicked to the side, then back to me. "No." But I could tell she was lying. That night I drove home, angry and hollow. I replayed the tape over and over, each time catching small hesitations, breaths, words half swallowed. The phrase, "proof about you," echoed until it stopped sounding like words. The next morning, I took the tape to a friend of mine, Jason, who works in audio restoration. I told him it was an old family recording, nothing else. He cleaned it up and sent me a digital file. "There's more near the end," he said. "You can barely hear it, but it's there." I played it again that night through headphones. At the end of Dad's message, faintly under the static, another voice whispered something I hadn't heard before. "He's not your son." Then the tape clicked off. I sat frozen for a long time. The voice wasn't Dad's. It wasn't Mom's either. It was deeper, rougher. Jim's, maybe. I rewound it, played it again. The whisper came right before the tape ended, like it had been recorded over another message. It dawned on me then, the tape wasn't just my father's confession. It was a copy. Somehow, both men's voices were on it. That meant Dad hadn't been alone when it was recorded. Maybe he'd found Jim before the crash. Maybe the confrontation had been longer, darker than either of them expected. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I'd made up my mind. If there was proof, whatever Jim had, it might still exist somewhere. He was a contractor. Contractors keep records, work orders, client notes, permits. I called Clearwater County Records again, this time asking about James Heller Construction. The clerk recognized the name. "We got those old boxes in the basement, not digitized. You want to come down? I can pull them." I drove there before lunch. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with a sheriff's department mug, led me downstairs. "We never throw anything out," she said. "Biggest fire hazard in the building." She pointed to a row of boxes labeled Heller Contracting 1988-1993. I dug through them until my fingers were gray with dust. Most of it was invoices and maintenance slips, nothing unusual. But near the bottom, I found a smaller folder labeled Ward Residence, Lakeshore Project, June 1993. My stomach turned. That was our cabin. Inside were photos of the property before renovations, sketches of floor layouts, and one folded note stapled to a page. Written in the same shaky hand I'd seen before. "Proof stored. Safety deposit, Clearwater Trust. Box 127. Clearwater Trust was long gone, but its assets had been absorbed by another bank downtown. I called them, half expecting a dead end. Instead, the teller said, "Box 127, yeah, that's one of the unclaimed ones we hold in archives. Requires proof of family relation or court order to open." I hung up, heart pounding. If I could prove connection through Heller's sister, Linda Bryson, I might get access. So I emailed her again, this time attaching the letter and tape photo. She called that evening. "Ben," she said, voice shaky but calm. I can help you. I'm listed as next of kin on Jim's estate. But before we do this, you need to understand something. Jim didn't lie when he said he had proof. But it wasn't about paternity. It was about something bigger. Something he discovered while working at that resort. I asked her what she meant. She hesitated. You should come here. Tomorrow. I'll show you. I drove back to Clearwater at dawn. The roads were empty, the fog low on the fields. Linda lived in a faded blue house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by overgrown trees. She met me on the porch with a box in her hands. Inside were newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and photographs of the resort construction. One stood out, a black and white photo of two men shaking hands beside a truck. One was Jim. The other was my father. He didn't tell you they worked together, did he? She asked. I shook my head. They were partners, she said quietly. Jim handled contracting. Your dad handled finances. But after the resort expanded, money started disappearing. Jim accused your father of skimming off the accounts. Your father accused him of lying. It got ugly, and then you came along. I felt sick. So all this wasn't about me? She sighed. It started as business. It ended as blood. As she spoke, the picture in my head rearranged itself. The arguments, the guilt, the crash, the disappearance. Maybe Dad hadn't left because of betrayal or love. Maybe it was greed and fear. Linda handed me one last envelope. This was in Jim's effects. He never mailed it. It's addressed to your mother. Inside, in jagged handwriting, I warned him not to go near the safe deposit box. If he takes what's inside, it'll destroy all of us. The note was dated the night before the accident. I left her house with the envelope pressed to my chest. That evening, I stood outside the bank, watching the reflection of my car in the glass. Box 127 waited somewhere inside, untouched for 30 years, and whatever was inside had driven both men to ruin. The bank lobby smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and old paper. I arrived before it opened, waiting in my car as the first slivers of sun hit the glass doors. I hadn't slept. Every hour of the night had replayed the same question. What could be inside that box that would destroy all of us? At 9 sharp, I walked in with the envelope and my ID. The clerk from the day before recognized me. Mr. Ward, right? You called about box 127? I nodded, sliding the Heller family affidavit across the counter, the one Linda had signed for me overnight. I have permission as secondary next of kin. He examined it, then typed something into his computer. We can grant you supervised access. It'll have to be opened in presence of a bank officer. Give me a few minutes. My heart thudded as he disappeared into the back. The vault door groaned open a few minutes later. Inside, rows of safety boxes lined the wall like tombstones. The officer pulled out a long metal drawer labeled 127 and carried it to a small table. Take your time, he said, leaving me alone. The box was lighter than I expected. I lifted the lid. Inside was a manila folder, a small leather-bound notebook, and a single roll of undeveloped 35mm film wrapped in tissue paper. The folder contained photocopies of bank statements and construction invoices, numbers circled in red ink, initials next to them, LW and GHW. My mother's and father's. There were also handwritten notes in Jim's messy scrawl. Money laundering through resort accounts. Check lake property transfers. Heller versus Ward. No audit trail after June. I swallowed hard. My parents had been moving money through that place. But the notebook was worse. Each page detailed transactions tied to lakeshore cabins and a name I didn't recognize, Brentwell Development. Several notes referenced buyout clauses, cash transfers, and federal contract delays. Near the end, one entry stood out. He said he'll make it right. I told him it's too late. If anything happens to me, the negatives tell the rest. Negatives. The film. I stared at it in my hands. Whatever was on it had been meant to expose someone or protect someone. The bank officer returned just as I was resealing the folder. Find what you needed? Yeah, I said quietly. More than I wanted. Outside, the sky was a flat gray. I drove straight to a photo lab an hour away that still handled film. The technician, a middle-aged guy with a salt and pepper beard, looked at the roll and whistled. Vintage Kodak Gold. Haven't seen one of these in decades. Might take an hour. I waited in the car, palms sweating. When he came out, his face was unreadable. You sure you want these prints? Why? They're heavy. He handed me the envelope. I opened it at a diner down the street. The first few photos were ordinary. The resort construction site, workers pouring cement, trucks unloading lumber. Then the tone shifted. One image showed my father shaking hands with a man in a sheriff's uniform. Another showed them counting envelopes inside one of the cabins. The next, my mother, standing near the window, half turned away, as Jim held a ledger open toward her. And then the last three. The first showed a close-up of a check written to Brentwell Development, signed by my father, endorsed by a county official. The second, taken through a cracked door, captured Jim and my father arguing. Jim's face blurred mid-motion, arm raised. The third was pure chaos. A car's headlights caught in motion, two figures by the lake road, one pulling something from the trunk. It must have been taken seconds before the crash. I stared at those photos until my coffee went cold. Each image told a story no one had ever wanted to admit. The resort hadn't just been a summer retreat, it had been a laundering front. My parents had been part of it. Jim must have discovered it and tried to blow the whistle. My father, terrified of losing everything, tried to stop him, but the confrontation spiraled out of control. And then the crash. I thought I'd back to Dad's tape, his voice shaking as he said, I didn't run because I was guilty. But he was guilty, at least of something. Maybe not murder, but betrayal, fraud, cowardice. I left the diner and drove for hours without a destination. The film envelope sat on the passenger seat like a silent passenger. Every few miles, I'd glance at it, half expecting it to vanish. By dusk, I found myself back at the lake. The air smelled like pine and ash. The waterline shimmered under a pale sunset. The ruins of the cabins were darker now, swallowed by vines. I stood where the crash road met the tree line, the same place I'd found the key. It hit me that this was the end of it. 3 people bound together by secrets, and I was the byproduct of all of them. I pulled out the tape recorder, the photos, and the note from Dad's box. I sat on the hood of my car and hit play again. I wanted to protect you. The words sounded hollow now. Protection isn't lying. It's facing what you've done. For the first time, I felt something close to pity for him. For all of them, really. They'd been kids once, with plans and hope and bad timing. They thought hiding the truth could keep it from burning down their lives. But secrets don't stay buried. They wait. I took out my phone and called Linda. She answered on the second ring. I found the film, I said. She was quiet. And? It proves everything. The deals, the sheriff, the money. It'll ruin a lot of people's names if it comes out. Another pause. What are you going to do with it? I don't know, I said honestly. Part of me wants to burn it. Part of me thinks it's the only honest thing any of them ever left behind. She sighed. My brother wasn't a saint, Ben. Neither was your father. Maybe the truth should rest with them. Maybe it should. But I couldn't decide which was worse, living with their lies or letting them die in silence. That night, I went home and spread everything across my kitchen table. The tape, the photos, the ledger copies. I stared at the chaos of it all, the 30-year shadow of two men who destroyed each other and left me to clean it up. At midnight, I opened my laptop and started typing. I wrote down everything: dates, names, what I'd found, what I hadn't. I attached scans of the evidence, saving it all under one folder. Then I uploaded it to a private email draft, addressed to myself, Linda, and one local journalist whose work I trusted. I didn't send it. Not yet. Just saved it there. If anything ever happened to me, someone would know. Then I went outside and sat on the steps with a beer, listening to the cicadas hum. For the first time in months, I didn't feel angry, just tired. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid, the same family photo that started it all. But this one was different. Someone had drawn a small X in pen over the man's face. On the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize, were 3 words: "He found peace." I never figured out who sent it. Maybe it was Mom, maybe Linda, maybe someone else entirely. I keep it in a frame on my desk now, beside a new photo of my own, family, my wife, my daughter, the dog. Sometimes I catch myself studying the edges, wondering what parts of my story she'll inherit, what truths she'll have to unearth when she's my age. I hope none. But life has a way of keeping ledgers, and the past, it always collects. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real-life confessions and emotional journeys like this one.